This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my old pal Evan Grant. Just the two of us on the podcast today. We couldn't get anybody else to come on with us. They all just said no, don't want to do it. Out.
That's not true. They said they'd come on with me. They had a little bit of a problem with.
Wow. No, the problem is that they're up there in Edmonton, and you got to take like a wagon train to get out of there, and then you got to take a train, and then there's there's dog sleds involved. There's all kinds of stuff to get back from Edmonton. So they'll be back later on this afternoon, but that's after we have taped this podcast. So you're going to have to just put up with a couple of real puckheads in Evan and I to talk about this. But there's it's really kind of a universal situation here that the Stars have, right, Evan? They're down 3-1 in this series. Teams that are up, or I guess they're down 1-3 in this series. Teams that are up 3-1 go on to win 91% of the time. 91% of the time. That is a little bit forbidding, is it not?
It's forbidding. It's not forbidden, but it's forbidding. Here's my general take. Being down 3-1 is not a good situation. It doesn't matter the sport, and it doesn't matter the series unless you're going to be playing like a best of 12, best of 13.
Yeah.
And I mean the Stars are in a hole, and I know you've got lots of thoughts about this.
Let's just start with this. What happened to the offense? What happened to Mikko Rantanen? I mean, in these 3 straight losses, they've scored 2 goals. Mikko Rantanen was early in the playoffs was looking like the best player in the postseason. And now suddenly, the Stars can't generate anything. Some of it is Stuart Skinner, who's played very well, Oilers goalie in the playoffs. But a lot of it is that they put so much pressure, and they're so much more physical than the Stars are, and they're just forcing them out of their game. So a lot of it is, is technical stuff like that, right? And then the fact that they've got, Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, 2 of the best players in the NHL, and that's probably at least one more than the Stars have. We were all kind of gaga about Jim Nill making that acquisition of Mikko Rantanen at the deadline, and it's like, wow, this team is just full of star power now. Well, suddenly we see what a team that has star power really is, and those guys have really been able to take over these games. The Stars basically, if they're not on a power play, they're not scoring, and they're not scoring very much, and then they're not killing the power plays. Last night that was a certain situation where the Oilers were 2 for 3 in the power play. So it's just been kind of a miserable effort here, and it's miserable to watch. It's a little bit like watching the Rangers trying to score. It's the same thing. You're just sitting around waiting for something to happen, and
nothing's as miserable as trying to watch the Rangers trying to score. Listen, I think the very broad narrative or overreaching narrative that I'd create from watching very little of hockey to this point is that it certainly seems like, and not just this particular series, but it seems like an overarching theme of playoff losses previous. And correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm just watching snippets and little bits, but that the Stars do get, they're not as physical as their opponents, and opponents tend to manhandle them a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's off and on over the years. Certainly, if you go back to the old days with the Stars, they were famous for roughing it up, right? And when they went to won the Stanley Cup, they were a very physical team, but not in the last. Yeah, you're right. Not in the last 10 or 15 years. That hasn't been the case. And it's you don't necessarily have to have that, but you got to have some of it. And let's just take an example from the game last night. Is that So here's Rope Hintz, who missed time because of he took a whack to his shin or somewhere in the lower extremity, as hockey likes to call these injuries, and missed some time. Well, he's just skating off the ice, in Game 5, and what's that game? That was Game 4. He's skating off the ice, and Evan Bouchard comes up and just takes a whack at him, and it wasn't a severe kind of thing, but it's like, how does this even happen? How did this happen on the ice? And of course, the response, as we heard from the sideline reporter at the game, was that Pete DeBoer said, "Yeah, we're not built to respond that way. We're not going to go after anybody." And apparently, that's what he told the players too, and so they didn't. So Evan Bouchard just gets away with it. I first of all have a problem with the fact that the Stars didn't respond to that. That one of their better players who missed time is costing them in this series. People are taking shots at him, and you just let him do it. Like, okay, all right, never mind. And you want to think that, okay, you don't want to, because obviously they're trying to provoke something, right, in that kind of situation. But there's plenty of ways to get back at someone if you want. And secondly, this is my problem with hockey. How the NHL doesn't step in and say, hey, we can't have this. Is the playoffs. This is one of the better players in the playoffs. We can't have people taking shots at people when they're just skating off the ice. When people are just leaving the ice, something like that has happened. It's one thing if you want to make a run at a guy in a legal play, when something is happening. But something like that is just, I just don't get it. And it's one of the problems I have with officiating in general these days and watching things that are happening across sports. And the people who keep saying, oh, but this is the human element, and we have to keep that. And that's why we can't have, robot umpires. We can't have these other things because this human element is so important. And all I know is that a couple of weeks ago, I'm in Phoenix, and we're in an Uber, and we're driving along, and I look over, and there's a car driving right next to me with nobody at the wheel. And then there's a car in front of me with nobody at the wheel. These are cars driving down streets with passengers in them and nobody at the wheel. And we're okay with that, but we don't want that kind of element involved in officiating that is, disinterested and objective and hopefully could make the right kind of calls. And instead, we're going to leave it to
how old. Do you have any idea how old you just sounded? Saying, "Oh, they got one of them driverless cars."
Yeah, that makes me sound really old to not be a little freaked out to look over next to you and there's nobody at the wheel of a car.
Kevin, I've been in a car with you and you drive while you're asleep. So I mean, it's not that big a deal. But I do agree with you on this element. And I think it's after the great experiment this spring of automated ball strikes, or at least the challenge system for ball strikes that was automated. It certainly seems like the ball strike calls in baseball have gotten either more egregious, or maybe we're just already conditioned to say, hey, you've got a method to get this right. Let's get it right. I think there's less empathy for umpires who miss calls below the zone or who miss calls one way or another. And so, yeah, I think that applies throughout all the sports. There is a way to, by and large, get all of this more correct. Now, where it comes across, like in the NFL and in the NHL, where you're calling penalties, and in the NBA too, where you're calling fouls, some of that is still subjective, and I don't know how you completely eliminate that element of it. But there certainly seems like there's more ways technically to get rules calls right, but I want to go back to one thing here, and it does go back to the physicality element of all this, right? What we've seen with the Stars is that they've got the finish line, and they're heavy on fins, and it still seems like, in hockey you kind of get broad generalizations based on ethnicities and where guys come from, but is not the reputation of the Finns that they are really good skaters and less physical than other players? And is that kind of a potential overall weakness for this team?
Well, that's kind of a generalization true across all sports, right? That the European players are always more technically, fundamentally sound, much more team oriented. guys that are great passers in basketball or hockey. That's what you get with the European players as opposed to the North American players who are much more physical, certainly in both, actually, in basketball and in hockey. They play a much more physical style, and there's much more of an intimidation element involved in all of that. I think it's part of it, but part of it too is just that they're just not generating any chances. They took 16 shots in the first period, of game 4, and then they went, like a period and a half with I think 2 shots. So, I at some point you have to wonder how much of this is a team that's just tight. This is a team that, we've been in the situation now 3 years in a row in the conference finals, and man, we have got to get to the finals somehow. And are they, as Tim wrote in his column today, are they feeling tight because Pete DeBoer feels tight? That this is a situation where he has been in numerous times in his career and has had a difficult time moving his team to the next level.
Well, that's all well and good, and it is certainly a valid talking point. But I do also want to say, the other team is pretty good. Edmonton did beat them last year and did go to Game 7 of the finals, and they do have, maybe the best player in hockey, maybe in the top 3, certainly in Connor McDavid. So they've got star power, they've got physicality, and they've got just as much playoff experience as the Stars have. So I from the Stars perspective, you could say maybe they are too tight and maybe they do feel like they've got to get over a hump. But I also feel like, from the Edmonton perspective, this is a very experienced, very strong team. And sometimes somebody's got to lose, somebody's got to lose. It feels like Game 3 was a real bust for the Stars. That does feel like it was a real letdown for them.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I do think that, you do feel like there are teams, I can remember, we played a team, and when I was in college, we're in a softball league, and we played in Houston and practically in the middle of the night. And
hold on, before we go any further, I just want to be clear. Are you about to comp a recreational softball league to the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Good.
Yeah. No, the point was we played this team. They were called the Fernando Llamas, which tells you a lot about them. They were really a bunch of nice guys, and they were really good. And they were really athletic, and it got to the point there we just couldn't beat them. And I remember thinking when I got up to hits, like wherever I hit this ball, somebody's going to catch it. And it's just like they're just too good, and it's like I was defeated. I never felt that way against anybody else except that team. That we just can't beat these guys. And that even in professional athletes, there's a little element of that creeps into your mind as like, man, what is it about these guys that we get in this situation and we just can't beat them? And the moment
sure. I think as a playoff series evolves, a lot of that stuff takes on its own life. And when you lose Game 3, what was it, 6-1 or 6-3?
Yeah, 6-1. Yeah,
6-1. When you lose badly like that, and it is against the team that you've lost to previously, I do think some of that self-doubt maybe does creep into your mind as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly all a valid argument. I think, you go back to the Rangers playoff appearances in the late 90s, right? And it was very clear that while the Yankees were a superior team, it was very clear the Rangers were defeated pretty much from the moment they walked in there. They had no chance. They were out mentally, strengthened, all of that. And I think that's a real factor.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that's probably what's happening here now for them. What they have to do now is in my mind, and if I'm Pete DeBoer, and if he's capable of doing this, is to say, hey, fellas, no pressure here. No one expects us to win. 91% chance. Go out there and have fun. And just try to try to relax a little bit. We're in this situation. We don't have to win 3 games. We just have to win 1 game. That whole thing. And if that's possible, you can do that. You have to turn this back on the Oilers in some fashion. You simply cannot go out there and do things the way you've been doing them up to now.
Agreed. And I also will agree to something that you said before. And it's easy to say this, go out and have fun, but we live in a world now where every glide of the skate is going to be overanalyzed and beaten down and all of that. And I just want to take it back to, you talk about a team that looks like it's played a little bit tight. The Rangers have looked like they've played a little bit tight offensively all year, and I think that's wearing down on them too. And then I look at a guy like Jake Berger, who was playing tight, went to the minor leagues, kind of took that whole approach of, I am going to have fun. I am going to go back to being me, even adopted the whole new Pope, new me thing. And I think he came back up here and relaxed. And my whole point is, if you can get to that point where you relax and go out and play and stop thinking so much and get out of your head a little bit and just go play and react, it's much more natural. You allow yourself to be your best version. That's what the Rangers are trying to do with their hitters right now. And I think that that's something that we battle in every sport right now. In which there's like individual performance, right? I think the NFL is the ultimate kind of like scheme team game because of the offensive and defensive lines, and so much is predicated by that. But we in individual sports, we're like hockey and basketball, where there are teamwork elements, but you're talking about individuals having to perform with the ball or the puck in their hands. I think sometimes guys get too deep into their own thoughts and put themselves in a mental hole that leads to a real hole.
A real home. So let's, before we get out of the star segment, let's talk about Pete DeBoer's future here. So you get to the conference finals 3 years in a row. You don't advance any of those years. I know that Tom Ghilardi is a fair owner, but he's a hockey fan. He's a Canadian. Got to be hard to lose to Edmonton 2 years in a row. I would think that there would be some pressure involved here on Jim Nill. I don't see Jim Nill firing Pete DeBoer if he's eliminated in five, if the Stars are eliminated in 5 games. Although that's certainly not a good way to go out after what had been such a promising, playoff series or a run up until now. And I wouldn't fire him either. I wouldn't call for him to be fired after this. But I have to say, a lot will depend on what happens, next year as well. I mean, at some point, you do have to ask, is there something about what he's doing here that is keeping this team from advancing? Are they feeling something from him and his, desire to finally break this, glass ceiling over his head?
So are you saying that Pete DeBoer, and I'm serious here, are you saying Pete DeBoer creates pressure for this club?
I don't know that he creates, but the book on him is that he's not like what he seems in the box, right? He looks like, he just looks miserable to me all the time, and I don't know, no, I don't know him well enough to know if he really is or not, but he certainly is very prickly at press conferences when they lose and you ask him questions about stuff. Most of the time you go to press conferences in hockey and they're the nicest guys in the world. Even after the games, you ask them questions, you ask them tough questions, they answer them, and they take, they don't make excuses, and they say, yeah, we got to do better, we got to play, this is not good. It's and then you get a guy like Pete, and he's prickly Pete. So I don't know if that's being communicated or not. I don't know. Sometimes we put too much on head coaches and managers. We think that the players are in professional sports are playing for them or in fear of them or whatever. I think that's a lot less than what fans think it really is. The effect of those people on their players. But at some point, you're looking for something. If you're a little lost there, as the Stars are now, unquestionably, you're looking to somebody to take charge here. And, when you got the captain, Jamie Benn, taking stupid penalties behind the net, and, and he's done that now in a couple of seasons of postseason hockey, it kind of makes you lose a sense of what's going on here. Who's in charge? Who's going to get us out of this mess,
Well, I'll just leave it with this, right? Chris Young, and with the Rangers having made a hitting coach change. And this is not aimed at Donnie Ecker in any way, but one of the things Chris Young has said, and more than one person has said to me, is the best coaches are psychologists. And it's not just, I'm going to teach you this scheme, or I'm going to teach you this method, or I'm going to teach you how to swing this bat. It is about knowing what buttons to push for different people to respond as a team. And that often means knowing your people better than your scheme. And I think sometimes from youth baseball all the way up to the elite leagues, whether it's the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, sometimes coaches tend to put too much faith in their ability to fix things rather than their ability to instill confidence in their players, knowing that their players ultimately determine the outcome.
Yeah, there's no question about that.
Yeah, that was very profound. You can say it.
Yeah, very profound. It was like the first thing you said in English this whole podcast. All right, we're going to leave our star segment now and move on over and talk about the Rangers. I was out there Tuesday night for that. I mean, it's just it was unbelievable to sit out there. It was like at Niagara Falls, the offensive output by the Rangers in that game. Unbelievable. It was just, I was in awe of it, of the 2 runs that they scored.
Hey, I mean, and look, it's easy to look at this and say it is miserable. And I said that earlier in the podcast. It is often miserable to watch them not score. What I will say is, you watch the at bat by Josh Young with 2 outs in the 8th inning. He did miss a pitch in the middle of the plate, but with 2 strikes, he did what the game asked him to do. Simply stay with the pitch, make contact. And what do you end up? You don't get a run out of that. You end up getting 2, because the runner goes to third base, and then on the unforced error by Alejandro Kirk, you get a second run. So if the Rangers can get out of their own heads and think they have to slug on everything and just stay with some pitches and make contact, contact is a good thing.
Maybe we should put that on the above the clubhouse door. Contact is a good thing. No question about it. In that particular situation, Josh Young did shorten up his swing. You know, he just kind of punched the ball. That's all he was trying to do. And you can say all you want to that in baseball, well, you don't do that kind of. You just swing the bat, right? Well, no, there are times when you take it. It's not a defensive swing, but it's certainly like, I'm just going to serve this out there. You know, I'm just going to punch it. This ball is. I'm having to reach out for it. You know, if you watch his backswing on that, it stopped about about 10 feet past when he actually made contact with the ball. That's all he was trying to do in that situation, and that's all he had to do in that situation. And the Rangers don't do a lot of that. And it's like you said, then you're making the other team make plays. You're putting the ball in play. Stuff has to happen, right? I
will say, sometimes from the bats of babes come the most profound advice. But what have we seen Alejandro Osuna do for 3 short games that he's been up here? He's been willing to stay with the pitch, adjust his bat plane to make contact, and serve balls into left field for hits. And that starts rallies. It fuels rallies. It moves the line.
And the funny thing about him is that in spring training, that's not what he was doing at all. He's just he's banging balls off the wall. I mean, he was making hard contact all the time. But you're right. Since he's been up, I haven't seen him take. I mean, he's taken a couple of rips, but certainly none of the hits he's gotten have been anything, or it's like, oh, look at the exit velo on that.
But look at the hits he got against Kevin Gausman on Monday, right? I mean, Gausman's throwing him splitters and stuff off the plate, stuff he wasn't seeing in spring training, where he could just gear up for fastballs. And what's he done? He's adjusted his approach. I'm not encouraging the Rangers to go up there and swing softly. But the idea is, do what the situation asks you. And I think that I on the broadcast last night, the Rangers, they were talking about Osuna, and they made kind of a comp to say that, his energy and everything, there's some similarities to a young Rougned Odor. And I had a couple issues with that. First of all, I don't think anybody should ever be compared to Rougned Odor in Rangers history. It's not a good comp.
No.
Secondly, this guy shows instincts at the plate. He understands plate discipline, and he's not just trying to hammer everything. So I'm really impressed with what I've seen by Osuna, both with the joy that he plays with and the energy, but also I think he's got pretty good instincts as a hitter.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this team. And I was talking to Sean McFarland as we were walking out after the game last night. Look, we know that this team's going to strike out. That their whole, machismo and offense is predicated on, we slug. So that's what you're going to get with that. But there were also elements of these guys that were supposed to be in their games that had better plate discipline maybe they had in the past. And I'm going to say, look, nobody has better promise on this team, except for maybe Corey Seager, than Wyatt Langford, right? And there's nothing really to complain about with him. But even with Wyatt lately, you notice that he is chasing a little bit. Last night there was a ball on the outside corner of the plate, and he takes it and he's trying to pull it to the left side. It's like, just if you're going to swing at that pitch, go to right field with it, And there's just not enough of that on this team, And I don't want there's a certain element of this is who these guys are. Certainly that's who Marcus Semien is, although he's tried to make an adjustment now, and he is going to right field much more often now than he has in the past. And maybe some of that is just a product of the fact that he can't get around on these balls the way he used to either. So, there certainly needs to be adjustments made here, and we'll see what they do here. We haven't even talked about the fact, that Nathan Eovaldi had to leave that game after 2 innings with what they called what was at first called a fatigued right triceps. After the game, they were saying he had tightness in his triceps. But apparently has had it now for a couple of weeks, and it got worse last night, and they just decided that's it. You come sit down, which is part of the thing you had talked about the other day, Evan, in one of your stories. It was about how many innings these guys have already pitched this year, and what that projects them to pitch. Jacob deGrom, Nathan Eovaldi, Tyler Mahle, that they would be, if they continue this pace, they would be upwards of 180 innings.
Yep, I mean all three of them. I think deGrom was on pace for 185. Mahle was on pace for 180, and Eovaldi was on pace for 195. And I do think that this stretch that ends as we record this on Wednesday morning, ends tonight, in which they will have played 35 games in 37 days, has taken a toll on the starting pitching, and that's why deGrom was pulled a little bit early on Monday. It's why the Rangers on Tuesday weren't going to press anything when Eovaldi felt something. I don't know that you're out of the woods with anything when you're talking about triceps fatigue or triceps tightness. But I do think that the Rangers were going to act very, very conservatively on that. And I think the the offshoot of all that is that inadvertently the Rangers had to turn to Jake Latz in a important situation there to keep a game tied or to give them a chance to win. And they need some other guys in the bullpen to show them that they can pitch some important innings. And Jake Latz did a great job on Tuesday night. And I think that will be a big lift for him going forward. So, sometimes you have a bad situation, and hopefully the Eovaldi situation is not significant. But if if it isn't, and the upshot of all that is that maybe Jake Latz has a little bit more confidence going forward, then all things considered, it wasn't a terrible result.
No, not that at all. And they, but that's the thing, Evan, about this team that's just been so remarkable. The bullpen obviously has faltered here lately. There have been, stretches here. If they hadn't been, it hadn't been for the bullpen, they could have won that streak of losing 8 out of 10 games. They probably could have won 3 or 4 more games if not for that. But that's the thing about this, is that the starting pitching has been unbelievably good. If anybody had said before the season that you'd have three starters with ERAs that good. The fact that they would have 6 shutouts, and that's not all on the starters. Obviously, there's a lot of bullpen helping in that, but 6 shutouts so far this season. You'd have said, well, they'll be in first place by 10 games.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. So that's the thing. If the hitting makes a comeback here at some point, which I'm not so sure that it can, because what we're seeing here is that if you look around the team, right, the guys who aren't producing are Adolis Garcia and Marcus Semien, and there's reason to believe that maybe they're not going to. They're at an age, and they've had, certainly in Marcus's case, he's played a lot of games, a lot of innings over the years. To think that this slump that they've both been in basically for a year and a half will continue. So if they can't get this thing turned back around, what are the chances that the pitching can be sustainable for an entire season, and then if they make the playoffs, into the playoffs as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I do think that they've got some ability to manage pitching innings here for the next month, but at some point in time, this offense is going to have to start to produce. I think if you get Evan Carter back, who gives you another disciplined hit in the lineup, if you get Corey Seager back, and then you're looking at Seager, or then you're looking at Garcia and Simeon at the bottom of the order. If the top of the order is really producing, you can get by with 2 really good defensive players at the bottom of the lineup who aren't really producing, particularly if they're contributing on defense, and particularly in the case of Garcia, who has this kind of tendency to go in and out of hot streaks and then slumps. I think, for lack of a better term, Adolis is going to have to commit to something and cheat, and it's going to create um, more holes. But he's either got to commit. I'm going to swing at fastballs. I'm looking for fastballs, and that's it. Or I can't chase fastballs, and I've just got to wait for something with spin so I can stay back on it. He's going to have to make become more one-dimensional, I guess is what I'm saying, to have some success, and then pitchers will adjust to that, and he'll have to make further adjustments. But Kevin, what I think I communicated this to you yesterday, because we were talking about a column that you were writing about how long of a leash do the Rangers have before they have to make a determination if they're buyers or sellers. And I do think one thing that has changed dramatically is with the greatly enlarged playoff field. It's not like you've got to be a good baseball team from the start of the year to the finish. You've got to get about 6 weeks where you're hot, where you get everybody functioning and pulling in the right direction. And if that, I think it's important for the Rangers to get that from June into mid-July, so that they can more certainly pursue themselves, see themselves as buyers and not sellers, or at least not sellers. But I think that could make all the difference in the American League West if they can do it. It's just the later you get into the season, the more you are running out of time. And to your point, we're past 1/3 mark of the season now, right? You are kind of what you are offensively, and this is not a great offense. It needs all its parts back. It needs to start functioning in a better, more efficient way. But it's not going to be the offense that the Rangers ever envisioned it would be going into the year.
No. Well, let me ask you this then. So Corey Seager is coming back. He's supposed to be back as we're taping this on Wednesday night. He will be a DH Wednesday night. In my mind, he needs to be a DH more or less going forward here until they feel like that his hamstrings, or at least something he can manage. I'm not even saying that that's a panacea, because because of the ferocity of his swings. It's certainly a possibility he can hurt himself doing that. But what I'm going to ask you is, do you think Corey would be amenable to saying, "Sure, I'll DH here for a while"?
Well, I think Corey wants to be in the lineup, and I think he's a little bit embarrassed and frustrated by the fact that he's missed as much time as he has over these soft tissue injuries over the last few years. I do have an issue with the idea, if he's not ready to play full time, I don't know that I'd activate him. And I'd also say, look, if you're asking me, when you're running out of the box and you're being explosive, you're more likely to hurt your hamstring than when you're, moving 2 steps or 3 steps to either direction in the field. So, yeah, is there a fatigue element from standing around? Sure, there would be. But I, I'd find it the last time they activated Corey Seager, they thought, okay, he can manage this. He can manage this. And he couldn't. And so I'm very reticent about the idea that you'd bring him back and say, well, we're just going to DH him for most of the next 2 weeks. I don't know that that would be the plan. But I do think that in an ideal world, you would be able to rotate that DH around just so guys aren't standing around in the field as much as possible. And certainly Corey would figure into that mix. Um, But I guess very long way of saying a short answer. I'd not be crazy about the fact of activating him and playing him primarily as DH because I think you're just masking you're waiting for the same situation to happen.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think probably most of the time, at least it's just more noticeable, he has had the injury or has tweaked the injury while he's running the bases. But then there have been other times when I've seen him in the field and he's reached for a ball or jumped for a ball and then come down and then he's kind of walking gingerly around a little bit too. So it may just be harder to tell when he's in the field than when he's running the bases. I think that what they feel is that this is the one guy we can count on to hit, and this is a desperate situation for us, and maybe you do this just to get them to the trade deadline and maybe get things going and make it where they could be buyers instead of sellers, and maybe that's what you feel like this is a really important stretch. It is just phenomenal to
Yeah, but
me that
we are 8 weeks to the trade deadline still. That's a
no,
long
no,
way to go.
it is a long way to go, but the other side of all this is that it's just phenomenal. As poorly as they've played, they're still easily in the hunt in the West, and
Yeah.
that is the remarkable. That is really kind of the the frustration level of all this is that on one hand you can look at it and say, well, look, see, they're only 4.5 games out, and the other half is that yeah, they played awful and they're only 4.5 games out. What if they played well? Where would they
Yep.
be? How far in front would they be if they played like everybody thought they were going to?
I completely agreed, Kevin. I mean, there's no there's no question about that.
All right, let's talk about a couple other things here with the Rangers. So at this point, let's say you were going to be buyers. At this point, you've got to go out and get a closer, don't you?
I think you've got to go out and add a reliever, sure. I think that yeah, I mean that's the only way that I know how to describe this is I do think you're going to need another arm in the bullpen before this is all said and done. And what I will say is if you're trying to solve issues at the trade deadline, the one issue that is most solvable is finding relief help. And so I think that look, if you're trying to find something at that point in time, that's what you want to have to be trying to find. And I think that the Rangers could potentially solve that. There's another a host of other factors involved, which is A, they got to get right. B, they can't have more injuries crop up. C, they're going to have to manage the payroll because, like, we're all very concerned about Ray Davis and how much he'd pay in taxes. But I do think if you've spent the entire winter trying to say, this is our philosophy, we want to be able to reset our tax calendar for our tax calculator for 26. If you then go over by $1 million, it's not the tax that's the problem. It's that you've defeated your entire strategy and left yourself with penalties for the next year, looming for the next year. So that's also a factor. But I do think that yeah, if they need to require a reliever, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, that would be number one for me. Another question is that Alejandro Osuna has gone into left field. He's played very well there, made a couple of nice plays already, and so they have moved Wyatt Langford to center field, which he can certainly play. But he's a big guy, and certainly your biggest offensive threat with Corey Seager out, and sometimes he's even a bigger threat than Seager is. I'm wondering if Osuna can certainly play center field, and that's part of what he brings you, right? Is the energy, the speed, everything else. And I think maybe they're just trying to break him in easily here, and you come up to the big leagues instead of shooting you right out there in the center field. We're gonna start you out here in left field. Surely at some point, though, don't you think that those two guys should flip flop?
No, I mean, if
No,
they're at this point in time, if Evan Carter comes back, Evan Carter's a center fielder. The Rangers feel strongly about Evan Carter as a center fielder. I, on the other hand, would say this. I think Wyatt's more than capable of playing center field. Is he as elite as in terms of range and reads as Evan Carter? No. But if you can't count on Carter to be ready every day, my priority becomes what's best for Wyatt Langford. And I have zero issues or zero concerns about the physical elements. Mike Trout, people want to say Mike Trout is broken down. Yeah, well, Mike Trout played center field for 12 years. Get through 12 years of elite center field play, and then we'll worry about the injuries. I
there's
don't
a
think
cumulative effect here, Evan.
huh?
There's a cumulative effect here.
There is. We'll worry about that 12 years down the road, Kevin. I think that Wyatt Langford can play center field. I think the last thing I want to do with Wyatt at this point in time is say, you're our best hitter, but we're going to move you here, and then we're going to move you here. And if we got a left-hander today, we want you in center field, and Carter's going to sit. I would just say, until Evan Carter is back, Wyatt Langford's my center fielder. And then when Evan Carter comes back, then we'll see how we want to manage those positions.
Well, see,
I
now
think
you just contradicted yourself here, because here's the deal.
Yeah.
First of all, don't count on Evan Carter. That's number one.
Don't count on what?
Evan Carter. You can't
No,
count.
I said when and if Evan Carter gets back.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the deal. You're talking about not wanting to move him around. Well, now you're saying, but when Evan Carter comes back, we'll move Wyatt back to left.
No. What I said is when Evan Carter comes back, then we'll have that talk. And I think if you play Wyatt Langford out there in center field for a month and you say, okay, everything is going fine, I think it then becomes a lot easier for rational thought to come through and say, well, when we have a lefty, Evan's going to sit and we're going to have to move somebody to center field. Why don't we let Wyatt Langford just stay in center field?
Well, it's because you're not letting him do that. When Evan Carter comes back, you're going to put him there. I say you put Wyatt Langford.
No, I'm not. That's exactly what I'm saying.
No,
when Evan Carter comes back, then we'll have the conversation. And if I'm having the conversation, I'm saying I'm leaving Wyatt in center field.
Well, then where's Evan going to go?
Then the conversation becomes, what are you doing in the corners? Because are you at that point in time, is Adolis Garcia still contributing defensively? Has he come out of it offensively? Look, the next guy to potentially lose playing time on this team is either Marcus Semien or Adolis Garcia. That's just where the Rangers are. And the most significant element of this Alejandro Osuna promotion, as Chris Young told me the other day, is probably the Rangers didn't want to bring him up quite as quickly as they did. 8 games in AAA, not a ton of experience. But then you get an injury, you need a little bit of interjection. And here's the thing. He is going to get the opportunity to create more opportunities for himself. That puts the pressure squarely on Adolis Garcia.
Oh, no question about that. But here's what my thinking is. You put Wyatt back in left field and you leave him there, and you leave him alone, and you say, Wyatt, you do a great job, and nothing's going to affect this. Not Evan Carter, not Alejandro Osuna, nobody. You're our left fielder. You stay out there. That's great. And then in center field, you put Osuna out there. Then if Carter comes back and Osuna goes into a little bit of a slump because he's a young kid just starting up, but then it's okay because you're not really jacking with him.
That's great. And who's going to play center field against a left-hander?
Well, I mean, it is an issue at that point. There's no question about that. But maybe we decide that Osuna's good enough to do that. If he's good enough of an advanced hitter, so maybe he can do that. I mean, at some point, left-handers got to hit lefties, right? You're not always going to be. Yes, you're not always going to be platooning people. You got to platoon Evan Carter. And I think that's my issue with Carter at this point. I'm almost like I was with Jacob deGrom over the last 2 years. It's like you just can't count on him. If he plays, it's all great. But you have to make a plan that is without those guys. And I think to your point is exactly that about Adolis Garcia at this point. Certainly, Adolis is trending in the wrong direction, and he is still playing very well defensively, as you pointed out on Twitter last night. He's still playing. He's still playing great out there on the field.
And this is the hardest thing to reconcile for both Simeon and Adolis, right? If we're going to say, hey, they're getting older, their bodies are slowing down, you would think that that would carry over to defensive performance. These guys are both playing elite defensively, and Adolis might be playing the best right field he's ever played. So I don't know if the issue is just that he's getting older and can't contribute offensively, or if there is something in his swing that can be adjusted.
Well, I think there's certainly something in both of their swings that needs to be adjusted. I think that's an issue. And I don't know how much of it has to do with age either, or the mileage, or whatever it is. I think when we've talked about this before with adults, when you're talking about a guy with that kind of build, you don't see a lot of that in baseball. And that is one of the things that baseball always frowned upon, was that, how do these guys, when they're this muscled up, how do they maintain their bat speed and their ability to react?
Let me ask you one other question before we leave this segment, Kevin.
Yeah.
Who are the best 3 players on the Rangers position player roster side?
Regardless of position?
Yeah, who are the 3 best players?
Corey Seager, Wyatt Langford, and I would say third for me, probably at this point, is Josh Young. Although, when Josh Smith is in the game, I certainly would put him in the running for that as well.
Right.
So I would say those are your 4 best players right now.
Right. Okay. And here's the thing: if in the long term, if you are talking about addressing real issues here, if you can put your best players, if your best players are capable of playing up the middle, don't you want them all up the middle if you can use them there? And if if you end up having to cut Simeon's playing time down, and you can play Smith at second and Seager at short and Wyatt in center field, that's a pretty strong middle of the diamond, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And of course, what you're talking about, strong players, look, everybody wants to. That was the great thing about Josh Hamilton playing center field, right? It's like these are unbelievable numbers for a center fielder, offensive numbers, to be able to put that gives you such an advantage if those guys can play those positions, because then you can get a player at the other positions, in the corner outfield positions, and who aren't as good defensively, but this guy in center field is making up for it, and he's a great hitter. So yes, that's what you want. That was the whole thing about shortstops for generations. Shortstops were terrible hitters, and then all of a sudden Cal Ripken comes along, and then when you get a player like that at shortstop, well, you completely change the dynamics of what you're trying to do. So yes, I agree with you in all this. At some point, they're going to have to make decisions. At some point, Sebastian Walcott is either going to be the right fielder or the center fielder, or playing somewhere. I'm not sure until Corey Seager can be moved off of shortstop and play at first base, which is probably where he needs to be playing within a couple of years. So these are all interesting decisions the Rangers are going to make. They're in a fortunate position if they don't have a lot of guys knocking at the door, right? There's not a lot of great players trying to push their way up, but there's been a couple. When you succeed with somebody like Wyatt Langford, that makes up for a lot of misses. If Walcott could approach when he's ready to come up, if he could approach what Wyatt Langford has done, well, then you've really made up for a lot of swings and misses up to this point in the player development.
Hey, let me tell you something. If you get and it's still hard to figure out exactly where you play Walcott at this point in time, but if you've developed Josh Young, Wyatt Langford, Jack Leiter, and Sebastian Walcott, say over a 5-year period, if you've broken those guys in over a 4 or 5-year period, now certainly you're going to have to extend one of those guys to keep those guys as kind of your core, but that's a pretty good core to have developed.
Well, it is, because we think back in the first 15 years of this century, they had 2 homegrown players, Rugi and who else? There were. Well, we had that run where
we had that run where they tried to basically sell that their core was going to be guys like Odor, Gallo, Mazzara,
It was
and
four.
at one point in time, Profar was in that mix before he got hurt and really was slow in developing. Um, and yeah, it just wasn't a good four. I mean, that's the bottom line. They overestimated the talent there. The thing here is when healthy, Josh Young has played really well. You can throw Josh Smith into that mix as well because he was not a major leaguer when they acquired him, and he's been a very valuable player and is in that same age group. Um, Langford also, I think, we're not like Nomar Mazar was at his best pretty much his first year, and then he kind of went backwards. We're seeing Wyatt Langford continue to get better.
Well, there's no question that Langford is much better than any of those players. Wyatt Langford is the best player. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say Wyatt Langford is the best position player that they have produced since Mark Teixeira.
Would that be Mark Teixeira, who was the guest on the Inside the Rangers podcast with me
Oh,
and John
your other
Hancock?
podcast,
That's right, Kevin.
the one that you're really in love with and you care so much about, and you're putting all your
I love
energy
both these
into.
podcasts because you know why? I am a
What's that?
new media giant.
It makes up for the fact that you're not a giant in real life. So that's
That's
okay.
true.
That's good.
I'm also
All
not a
right.
giant who was smart enough to realize that my radiator was apparently leaking yesterday, and now my car is in the shop after I spent 90 minutes on the exit ramp of the DFW airport yesterday afternoon.
That's always fun, isn't it?
That was a
That kind
fun
of,
time.
yeah, it was.
Fun
I'm
time.
sure that was. All right, we're going to move over into the little potpourri section of the podcast. We love to talk about that kind of stuff. The
Yeah, this
Charles
is going to be
Schwab,
very little poo here.
very little. The Charles Schwab, whatever they call that thing. It's just a sin to me that that's not just called the Colonial anymore. That's just a sin. When you say the Charles, I'm sorry if I'm offending title sponsors here, but I don't want to talk about the Charles Schwab tournament. I want to talk about Colonial. That's got some history to it. That's got something that means something. It's like that's just it's awful that they took that out. And of course they basically did that with the Byron Nelson as well. The CJ Cup, all this
Yeah,
stuff.
but
It's just
you can still get away with calling it the Byron Nelson. The Colonial just doesn't even. It had such a regal name, and it has a great place in history, and now it's been reduced basically to, yeah, just another secondary stop on the tour.
yeah. This could be anywhere. Could be anywhere. No one would even know.
Could be in
It was good to
Moline,
see.
Illinois.
Yeah, it was good to see Scotty Scheffler make a run there. He doesn't have to win this thing. It's like it's amazing. I think in his last four Colonials, he's finished in the top five, I believe, in all four of them, which is pretty good. It's really good for the Colonial, as I'm going to call it, to have him out there and in the running to win these things. So that's good. And I would expect he will continue to have a big summer, and uh, that will end well for him. I'm sure. We were talking about this the other day about Scotty, and he's not as dominant a golfer as Tiger Woods was in his heyday, and probably not as dominant a golfer as Jack Nicklaus was in his heyday. Um, but I'm going to tell you, in the last, I don't know, 25, 30 years, there have been few golfers who have been as good, other than those two as Scotty has been, which is really saying something. There used to be a time when you could count on guys. There were other guys who came up and were also very good golfers, like especially Tom Watson. In his day was very good. He's certainly put himself in that class,
He's
and
the
and
best
maybe.
golfer in the world at the moment.
Well, he
Period.
is. And he is. There's no question about it. But guys have made those kind of runs before for a little while. Greg Norman and people like that. But then they can't sustain it. I think Scotty can sustain this because of, as everybody notes about him, he gets better at everything. He just keeps getting better, and his demeanor is such.
Well,
He
it
doesn't
all
let stuff
comes
bother
back
him.
to sustainability on that front. I mean, at one point in time, we were talking about Jordan Spieth in this way, and it Jordan Spieth had a great run, but it was a very brief run. And if Scotty can continue to maintain this, yeah, it becomes legendary. He becomes a legend in terms of the golf greats.
Sport. Yeah, sure. Well, and I was chief among the people trying to make it into a big three from Texas. I was going to have Jordan Spieth, Scotty Scheffler, and Will Zalatoris. Well, Jordan has continued to struggle. It has been he had the wrist problem and he got through that. But it's more than that with Jordan. It just feels like he's mentally at war with himself all the time, and it's just not a good thing. There was a time when he was able to do those things and rally around, and he hit a bad shot that he was a lot like Phil Mickelson, make a bad shot, then make a tremendous comeback shot, and he just seems incapable of doing that right now. And then Will Zalatoris just had another back surgery, so he's had two back surgeries now. At 29, not good. So Scotty is kind of leaving both of them in the dust, and that was a very telling quote a couple of weeks ago at the Nelson from Jordan talking about Scotty, that I used to dominate those guys. He's a little bit older than Scotty and Will, and now I don't. And and he said that's a hard thing for me to say. And that has to be hard because you look at this guy and think, I used to just kill this guy, and now I can't. And now he's killing everybody. He's getting better and I'm not. And that kind of goes back to that whole thing when we see this in sports all the time, where people are really good when they're young. The question is, can they still keep getting better, or did they hit a ceiling and that's as good as they're going to be? I'm not saying that Jordan won't ever get back to where he was before. Maybe he does at some point. And I certainly hope he does. He's a good guy, and I wish him well. But Scotty is doing it, and he's kind of, his confidence up and his demeanor is such that he can continue to do that. I think he is not a guy at war with himself, and that's what you have to be in golf. In all sports, you have to have confidence in yourself and what you're doing. There's no question about that. But especially in golf, when you get all those voices in your backswing, it's not a good thing. Also, we want to talk a little bit about the WNBA. The Wings had lost 4 in a row. Paige Bueckers probably hadn't lost 4 games in a row in her entire life. And she was asked that question, as a matter of fact, and she couldn't remember it. I'm betting no, that she has not ever done that. But she got to win back in her old stomping grounds in Connecticut, so that was good for her. Unfortunately, it looks like with Caitlin Clark's injury that she may not be able to play when the Fever comes here on June the 27th, and that would certainly be a downer if she's not available for that game.
That'd be a real lost opportunity. I think the last thing I read was Caitlin's supposed to be out a minimum of 2 weeks with that quadriceps injury. I will point out that Evan Carter has been out almost a month now with his quadriceps injury. It's not a short-term deal.
No.
But that was going to be a game at the AAC. That is a game at the AAC, and it was an opportunity to really show off the Wings. And this is just as an aside, Kevin. I was talking to our good friend and the first general manager of a women's professional basketball team in Dallas, Nancy Nichols, who drafted Nancy Lieberman #1 way back when. And she was asking, Nancy's living in Connecticut most of the year now. And she was
Nancy
asking
Nichols.
me about, are the Wings selling out? And I had told her that you had gone to the first game. It was announced as a sellout, but it was kind of a half crowd. And she was kind of bummed to hear that. And I said, but listen, they're playing in Arlington, and it's hard enough to draw people to Arlington for the Rangers. Most of the time, it's a real impediment for the Wings, and it's unfortunate to hear that the Dallas arena project has been delayed further, because I really think that they do need to be in the city of Dallas to fully capitalize on Paige Bueckers and on the uptick in interest in the WNBA.
When I was out there for that game, and I've been out for a couple of games out there, I can't say I'm a regular visitor out there, but just from my observation, it's a very loyal crowd. It seems like the kind of crowd that you get at college games and women's college games, where it's there's some older people there, and there's a certain mixture of people there who, like when the players were introduced, Paige didn't get any bigger ovation than anybody else did, and I think it's kind of like, you would expect that this, as Maya referred to it, the Paige Bueckers effect. Their merchandise sales, everything's way up, but a lot of that is coming from people who were already huge Paige Bueckers fans, right? From her days in UConn and then growing up in Minnesota, where she was a legend there as well. And so that doesn't necessarily translate to games at College Park Center. So
Well,
yeah,
that's
I'm
good.
with you.
The idea here is to grow, right? Is to grow
Yeah,
sports. You are going to have hardcore fans who do appreciate the women's game and have appreciated the women's game for a long time. But the idea to make this kind of a bigger sport is you've got to expose more people to it, and it's just harder to expose people to it in Arlington. And I'm only saying that from 30 years of experience of driving out to Arlington and knowing how hard it is to get the Rangers to be a their fan base has grown, but how hard it is for the Rangers. There's an excuse for people to go to Arlington if they don't want to.
well, there's no,
Traffic, the commute, all of that. So, and especially when you're trying to grow a smallish fan base, I think you've got to do everything you can to give fans the lack of excuses for going to a game.
well, there's no question about that. I'll just remind everybody about what Tom Hicks told me, and I always have said this was his singular stroke of genius, was that he said our ticket base, everybody wants to think that we draw fans from Fort Worth and Dallas, right? Equally in equal numbers, and that's just not the case. The ticket base for the Rangers is all in Collin County and in Dallas, 75% of it, and the rest of it's coming from Dallas and the mid cities. So that's why he moved the AA franchise from Tulsa to Frisco and put that out there. He said, I was just trying to give those people out there some baseball who didn't want to drive an hour and a half to get to games. So, get home from games. So, yeah, you're exactly right. I think they need to move to Dallas. They need to be a Dallas-based team. And that can only help that situation. We'll see what happens here down the line with the Wings and how a Paige affects that team. As I said when I was out there, she's a really nice player. She's really good. She does everything the way you want her to do it. Very smooth, all around player. And to me, without question, is already the most talented player on that team. They've got a couple of good players on that team, but she is the most well-rounded player on that team, and so they should grow with her, and she should hopefully grow with them. Anything else we want to talk about, Evan? Is that it?
No.
I love that. I love the way you said that. I'll be going out to the airport today, left field, to talk to the Stars, write a little column there following up after that loss. I love the fact that when the Stars come back from games, they come on the private jet and you get to talk to them out there at left field at that little airport.
Are you going to be out there with a sign, "Welcome home, Stars"?
No, I was going to say, "Welcome home, losers." That's it. That's going to be my reaction.
See, Kevin, they need to have fun. You need to, if I were you, I'd go out there with your face painted, holding a sign saying, "Let's go get them, boys."
I think that a lot of people already think I'm a clown. I don't need to dress up like one too. So that's probably
Well,
not
as somebody who comes from a long line of actual clowns.
actual clowns. Karen the clown. Is it Karen? Karen the clown? Your cousin?
Well, stage name. We don't want to give away personal names. It's Mademoiselle Ooh La La.
We don't want to give away.
And her husband Bounce. I will say this: Bounce's real name is Steven, but everybody he may sign checks as Bounce.
I don't think that clowns are allowed to be married, are they, in real life?
Oh, sure.
Oh, really?
That's how they had a clown kid.
Oh, so
their son Daniel, my cousin.
Does the baby come out like a little red nose?
Daniel has started his own, and he's really successful with the Cowboy Circus, which he does as kind of a juggling and crowd appreciation act at fairs and everything. He got married a year ago. We were at the wedding a year ago, married a girl named Lindsay who had nothing to do with clowns at that point in time. And now Lindsay is part of the act. We are a full-blown clown family.
Yeah, and the good thing is that you're doing your part to uphold that tradition, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the Jackie Mason of the group.
I think more Mort Saul, probably a little more, a little drier, maybe a little more morose, but that's okay. That's all right. It's good to be something. It's good to be from something, no matter what it is. We all need to be coming from a place that treats us right and that we love, and whatever.
The sad part of all this is that Karen's sister Joanne actually performed in a circus in college because she went to Florida State. She was not a clown; she was a trapeze artist. So I mean, she doesn't get enough credit. But we are a family of circus performers.
When you have a reunion, do you have it under the big top?
Yeah, Florida State actually has a real performing circus.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
There's a Deion Sanders joke that goes in there somewhere, but I'm just going to let that one go.
Yeah, I'll just let that go. I think that's for the best. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the podcast. We'll be back. Will we be back next week? Yeah, we'll be back next week. I'm going up to upstate New York tomorrow, Evan, for my brother-in-law's annual. Actually, he has it twice a year. Field and Supply.
Field and Stream, as I like to call it.
Yeah, Field and Supply. It's very nice. A lot of fun.
One year, Gina and I are going to accompany y'all, and then we'll stop in New York City for a day or two, and we'll.
That'd be beautiful. Let's do it. Let's get it going. All right.
We did a pretty good job of eating our way through the city last week.
We didn't even talk about that. We'll talk about that next week.
All right.
We always like talking about eating our way through the city. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.